We tend in our culture to focus a lot on the truth of our faith. Maybe it's just as important to think about its beauty. Good morning, friends. It's good to be with you. As always, thank you for taking a little time to be with me today. We are, of course, still in the season of Advent. I hope that some of you, at least, have been working your way through the Advent calendar. We have at our family, and I have to say, I'm just thrilled and delighted by this piece. It's been a really meaningful way for us to walk through the days of Advent. I mentioned this before, but the calendar came with a little instructional letter which lifts up the 7 types of categories that are behind the various days. And as I was reflecting on those 7 categories, it strikes me that they line up with, and don't tune out here, I'm going to use a big philosophical word, but they line up in some ways really beautifully with what are called the Transcendentals. Those are goodness, truth, and beauty. They predate Christianity. They actually go all the way back to Plato and then Aristotle, and then they were sort of baptized into the Christian tradition through Thomas Aquinas and others. And so, for example, if you start with truth, read and reflect, get at, maybe you could say, the truth of our Christian faith. If you look at the one that says act, do something beautiful, that is related to goodness. And by the way, those two, again, the truth of Christianity, you could think of someone, I don't know, I talk about C.S. Lewis a lot, who's good at articulating the intellectual framework, the dogma, the doctrine of Christianity. If you look at goodness, you might look at someone like Mother Teresa, who is probably the best known saint of the 20th century. And she's famous, again, not for articulating necessarily the truth in words, but in acting it out, doing acts of service that end up people recognize as good. And so there's attractiveness to both of those, but the third one is beauty. And we have a couple of categories here, listen and view, that are absolutely related to things that are beautiful. Might be music, I mentioned the Spotify lists in other episodes, but it also might be artwork. And I want to suggest today that in our culture, we maybe overemphasize the true, right? Well, are we right? Do we have the right information? Does it make sense? And that's important. I don't want to minimize that. And we maybe don't lift up enough the beautiful, which is absolutely another pathway to God historically. And that's why in this Advent calendar we've had paintings like Christ of the Breadline, or The Peaceable Kingdom. Those are by Fritz Eichenberg and Edward Hicks. We've directed you to music. Before we started the Advent meditations, daily meditations, we were doing morning prayer. A lot of those morning prayer services were related to something called Visio Divina, where we invited people simply to stare at a piece of art and use it as a form of prayer. It's interesting as I think about some of the beautiful things in our Western culture, let's say. I think of a statue like David by Michelangelo, or the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, also by Michelangelo, or I think of music by J.S. Bach, or I think of the plays or the poetry of Shakespeare. And all of those we respond to aesthetically. We respond and we say, there's something unified about it. There's something proportional about it. There is something, again, beautiful about it. And as sort of an aside, it's interesting, when you look at any of those beautiful pieces of art or music or literature, you don't think, well, you know, Shakespeare, he was okay, but we do it a lot better in 2020. Nor do we say about Michelangelo's sculptures, he did okay, but we've learned so much since he lived. We look at those and we realize something eternal about those things, which gives us an insight into the eternal truth and goodness and beauty of the God we worship. There's a great line from one of it's called the fathers of the Christian church. His name is Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Gregory of Nyssa. He's actually acknowledged as a saint by all of the traditions of the church, including Lutherans. He lived in the 300s, so 1700 years ago. And one of the things he said is, and I love this quote, is, "Beauty is one of God's names." This Advent, I pray that as you look around at God's creation, you might find some beautiful things and remember who to say thank you for them. As always, thanks for spending some time with me. Be well, stay in touch, and God bless.